Hey, what's up, guys? You're watching DIY Dozier. And on today's episode, I want to show you how I created a wooden plaque that I carved out of 2x4s. There was an idea to create a plaque for a law enforcement motorcycle club, which was brought to my attention a couple years ago. This is an older project, so all I have is some pictures of it. I'm just going to run through it and share it with you and how I created it. Maybe give you some ideas to run with on your own. You can apply this towards anything. It doesn't matter what it is. This is just a general idea of how to create a plaque out of 2x4s. Essentially what I did was there was a design for this particular motorcycle club, and like I said, it was a law enforcement motorcycle club. It was called the Punishers, and they had a logo, which you would see on the back of their vests, banners and stuff for their support causes and all that, as with any motorcycle club that hosts any kind of charity event or anything like that. So to get started with this particular plaque, what I did was I went down to Lowe's and I bought some 2x4s. I had determined that this particular plaque was going to be 2 feet wide, so that's 24 inches. It's going to be a perfect circle. I go down to Lowe's, I buy a bunch of 2x4s and I cut them up. I lay them down to get about 30 inches. About 30 inches square is what I was working with before I cut out my circle. The first step in the process of creating this plaque was I had to plane my 2x4s to make sure they were perfectly square and perfectly flat. 2x4 is not flat and square, new as it is. It's going to have rounded corners on it, and it's just not rectangular. It needs to be perfectly square. So anyway, I ran the 2x4s through the planer, got them completely squared off, and then I laid them all down, lined them all up. I took some Titebond wood glue and I placed that in between each board. I pulled them together with a clamp, clamped them in place, let them set and cure overnight. The next day I came back, and with a circle jig, I traced out a perfect 24-inch wide circle. I cut the circle out with a bandsaw or a scroll saw. You could use a scroll saw, you could use a jigsaw for it. Anyway, I used a table router, and I used a 3/4 inch roundover bit to round over the edges on the face of this project. I did not use it on the back side. I used it on the face only. And then the next thing I did was I took my logo that I was going to be utilizing, and I printed it out off the printer in several sheets of paper. So you can do this at home. You don't have to go out to some place and have them make you something large enough to sit on this. I wanted to make a stencil. What I did was I had about 8 sheets of paper essentially to create this logo. I took the logo that somebody emailed me, I put it on the computer, and then I blew it up like 500%. And when I clicked print, it would print like, you'd print like the front corner of the image first, and then it would print the left middle, and then it would print the left bottom, and then it'd come back and print a center section of it, and then another center section, and then the bottom, and then print the right. So essentially what I had was a bunch of papers with a giant puzzle, and then I took all that, laid it out on the table, taped them together to get my image back large, and I laid that image on top of this wood here that you see. I trimmed out the edges of the paper to make it lay over the wood accordingly. I got it positioned to where I wanted it, and then the next thing I did was cut it out with a pair of scissors a little bit better, and then I took some Elmer's stick glue, and what I did was I rubbed it all over the wood, and I rubbed it all over the back of the stencil I was going to use, the paper there, and I pressed it into place onto the wood. I let it cure for about an hour and a half, and then I came back with a plunge router by hand, And what I did was I set it on a 1/2 inch depth, and I plunged it down. And what I did was I traced out the perfect outline of all the items I could get with that plunge router. I ran around it. If I could get in between some letters, I did. If I couldn't, then I did not. But I tried to cut down on some work time just by going ahead and using the router with that 1/2 inch bit to get as much of that material as I can knocked out before I moved on to the Dremel tool. So after I got it all carved out with the plunge router, I came back with my Dremel tool and I put a carving bit inside my Dremel tool, and I carved out all of the fine lines in the skull that you see. I carved out all the inside of the letters. I touched them up. I got as close as I could to get all the detail around the letters that I could. Carved out the nose area and the eye sockets and the skull and the teeth and all that. So once I got all those carved out, I removed my template from the surface. I gave it a quick sand on the top just to see what it looked like and get all the paper off of the wood. I came back in then with a Dremel tool and I started sanding. I had a sanding attachment on the Dremel tool, and I started to kind of just chip away a little bit at it. You know, started with the edges around the skull, around the where it says Alabama, around the LE and the MC, and the very top where it says Punishers. It kind of faded that hard edge down. So once I got that hard edge faded down, then I started fading down the hard edges, sanding down the hard edges around the skull and the eye sockets, and the letters were next. And then I had to really get into the detail, changing out various bits on the carving bits, and using the sanders and adapters to smooth around all the edges, make sure everything looked good. When it was all finally done and sanded, I came back with some acrylic paint. It was black acrylic paint. You could buy it at a hobby store. I had a fine paintbrush, and I painted by hand with the paintbrush inside all the veins you see on the skull. And then I also did the eye sockets, the nose. I did the gums on the teeth line there on the skull. I came back and I sanded the plaque with 400 grit sandpaper by hand all around. Everywhere I could touch, I got it in there. Cleaned it up real good, and then I coated it with polyurethane coat. It might have been a stained polyurethane mixture, a golden oak or something like that. 2 coats of this polyurethane with a foam brush. And after it cured, I came back and I took a picture hanger and I attached it to the back of the plaque so it could hang on the wall. And here we are, hanging on the wall as a finished product. If any of you carvers out there have any ideas or anything, I know that you can buy tabletops that are pre-made, that are round and ready to go. You can carve out of those if you want to, or do whatever you want, but this is definitely an option I will be using again. It was not difficult. If you have access to a planer and a router, you need to have a router for sure, and a Dremel tool. The Dremel tool really took out a lot of time. I spent about probably 6 hours using a Dremel tool. Guys, thanks so much for watching the video. If it helped you out, or if you think that this is a project that you could tackle on your own, be sure to click that like button and subscribe. If you have a comment or a question, be sure to drop it down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I get a chance. Share the knowledge, share the passion, and share the skill. And as always, do it yourself.